The third speaker is Steven Abbott. And it's not without reason that he is the first speaker in the future part. Steve is very creative and sometimes even provocative in his thoughts, which I really appreciate. He edited an IGC ebook, which is free, and he has many other ideas. And surely he will inspire you also with his presentation. So Steven, can I hand over to you, please?
Okay. So I'm the bad guy today because I get a bit mad at how much bad IGC stuff there is out there. You've been spoiled today. You've had really good talks, but there's a lot of bad IGC stuff out there. And clicking to the next page. Right. So the background to this is that I've written a free ebook on IGC, as Ralph said, and it links directly to apps that bring the science alive. And because the apps are open source, and free to use and free of adverts, they're safe on corporate networks. So I want audience participation. If we've got the problem of a virtual meeting, but let's do something positive with it. Let's get you to interact with these apps live. Now, you already know some of this stuff because it's been mentioned in other talks. But when people mention it in talks, it's just, we talk about the morphological index, things like that. I want us all to get a feel for it by doing them live. Sabina has put the links to these things into the chat window. Hopefully she'll put all the other ones now, so they're not separate ones. So we'll see in a moment how you make use of those. But here's the problem. This on the screen is official ideal IGC. We have our lovely alkane probe molecules. Who's interested in alkanes? No one is interested in alkanes, but that's what we use. Very odd. And they interact with this nice particle, and we get a measure of the pure surface energy. Then we might have a polar probe or two, and they interact nicely with the particle, and we get polar interactions. And then we try acid-base, often weird molecules which aren't really acid or base, but never mind, and we get the interactions. The trouble is, we often aren't interested in these idealized situations. We, and particularly me, want to know about formulation or reality. So our particles, and I'm talking about particles here, aren't like this at all. They're more like this. Our particles aren't perfect spheres. Okay, I'm exaggerating here. They're not as bad as this, but you get my point. Our particles have functional groups attached to them, often activated in solvent. Yes, they might be nice silanes. Everyone knows about those, but there's more to life than silanes on particles. We have the solvent around, there are other species interacting, and there are polymers doing their thing. Now, in general, IGC does not map to this reality, especially if you just measure surface energies. We've already said that IGC is great for measuring the HSP of polymers on particles, and that does map and can be measured by IGC. But that's not a topic for this talk because I've spoken about it at other IGC symposia. And then many of our particles are functionalized or have stabilizers on it. In the dry monomolecular world of IGC, they might be like these polymers around here, all closed in on themselves, all frightened of the space outside. In solution, they might be like this. So any measurement we make like that might be totally irrelevant to what happens in solution. Or they might actually fall off on solution, and we would never know from IGC that that's what's going on. So we need to be much smarter about how we use IGC to get formulation insights. So to get these insights, we must, first of all, ask the right questions and do the right measurements to get the answers. If you are only interested in surface energy, that's a sad fate, but if you are, then okay, make sure you measure surface energy. But make sure you are asking the right question, not just saying, well, surface energy is the answer to all known problems, because it isn't. So are our particles smooth, slightly rough, or very rough? There are two parts to this question. I have been sickened by the number of surface energies measured by IGC on really boring particles when you know absolutely that those high surface energies are not the surface energy of that particle. And the reason for this is well known, and yet people carry on printing this nonsense. If your particle is sitting on a beautiful surface, then it has sort of one part of it. If the probe molecule is sitting on one part of the surface, one part of that probe molecule can interact with it. If it's sitting at a corner, then two parts of it are interacting. So it's sort of getting twice the interaction energy. If it's in some sort of hole, you get 3 parts, and if it's down a hole, you get 4 parts. Now here's the thing. The retention time depends on the interaction energy, EI, of each of these particles, but it's an exponential. So a small fraction of particles that go down holes are going to have a very large influence on the average retention time. And when people just do simple surface energy measurements, they have no idea of this. So it's a scandal, in my view, that this obvious explanation for high surface energies of boring particles has not been widely adopted. So how do we get to know more? Well, you already know from Eric and others how this might be done. You measure the branched and cyclic equivalents to a dull alkane, in this case, isooctane and cyclooctane. So what I want you to do is go to the Surface Morphology app. If you want to go off and do your emails or do Google to do something else, that's fine by me. I will never know. But if you're interested, go to this app, and I will just alt tab to it. So here is this Surface Morphology app. I'm running it from my local host. You will have it on the server. Here is the plot of the delta G of the standard alkanes, a nice straight line. And that's how you get the surface energy calculated. I'm not interested in that. What we've done is put in isooctane, which on a perfect surface is known to behave like a 7.98. So it's just less than octane when it interacts. So if the VG means that it comes out exactly at this point, then you know it's having no special interaction. But if it's less, so now turn the VG of the probe down. As you go down, the delta G calculated goes down, and the IM, the morphological index or index morphologique, goes down. So this is where these IM values come from that were quoted in earlier talks. So that's how you do it with isooctane. Now, click on cyclooctane, which happens on a perfect surface to be like an 8.3 ane. So you've selected cyclooctane, change the chi-T to 8.3, or as close as you can get on the slider, doesn't matter much. And then if the VG of the probe takes it up here, that's meaning the delta G is higher than it should be for as an 8.3 ane, and therefore the morphological index is an unrealistically high 2 whatever, but you get the point. The morphological index is higher. Let's go back to the presentation. So now we say we can start looking for interesting stuff, as Eric stressed in his wonderful opening talk. So we've tried the same app with that cyclooctane. Its VG is greater than expected. We have an IM greater than 1. So now go to the next app in the list, which is the RIM app. So I've got it already open. If you haven't seen the links, you can just go here to the menu and select RIM surface analysis. It doesn't matter how you get there. So now you enter the IM of your isooctane, which might be a bit lower than 1 because it's a classic branched alkane which can't interact with this rough surface. But the cyclooctane, which has a higher dispersion value, is probably interacting in a more interesting way with stuff on the surface. So you have it higher than 1, and you are in this soft or 3D domain. If the cyclooctane is very low, then you're in clean nano rough domain, which doesn't interest me in the slightest, but is often of interest to others. So that's how you get the morphological index, and then the RIM, the relative index of morphology. So this is pointing towards soft surfaces. That's a vague word, but it's indicative of something. It's really clear this difference. Then how polar and acid base is the surface. Hopefully you're in the routine now, so you find the specific interactions app. I didn't call it polar because there's more to life than polarity, so specific interactions. So here's the specific app, the same tedious curve of the alkanes. And in this case, we've got toluene, and the chi-T of toluene is 6.3, so you make sure you have 6.3 entered. And if the VG of the probe is a bit like this, then we're getting a specific interaction of 1.8 kilojoules per mole. So this way we get to know how toluene is interacting in a more interesting way compared to it just having a neutral surface. That's fine, but who cares about toluene? Do the same thing for a good range. And then you start to build up a picture of the interactions. I am so tired of IGC papers that talk about the alkanes, toluene, and isopropanol. There's more to life than toluene and isopropanol. And if you're not doing a range of probes, then you're missing out. So this means a machine with a good autosampler and good software. That makes it easy. It's no more difficult to do it if you've got things set up properly. If you're on a bad old machine, then it's tiresome and no one does it. And then if you use known base or acid probes, you get what's allegedly called acid base. I disagree, but that's a different topic. So what I'm saying is that if you are interested in infinite dilution IGC, and why not, you should do it properly, which is the fivefold way. Get the understanding of the general surface energy and whether it's likely to be real or not, or is it due to these pockets and corners and things. You get the roughness via IM, you get other interactions via the RIM, you get to know the polar or specific interactions, and you get the acid base. This is a great start, and it can identify differences between quotes identical samples, and that's an IGC speciality. And I'm delighted that Julien, for example, pointed out that you get very distinctive differences. I didn't always agree with his explanations, but I absolutely agree that having those differences is really vital. That's a good start, but we're still removed from deeper information. And that's where the terror of people for finite concentration is unhelpful. So it's nice staying in the safe world of infinite dilution, as Julien did, but there's more to life than infinite dilution. See, we are never interested in isolated molecules at the surface, or most of us aren't. So let's do experiments with lots of molecules, i.e. finite concentration. So this is when we find what's really going on. Behind the scenes, standard IGC assumes, and this is erroneous, it assumes a simple AEDF, absorption energy distribution function, which Eric mentioned in his opening talk. It's saying that this particular surface with boring alkanes has an interaction energy of 30 kilojoules per mole with some sort of distribution around it. It's highly unlikely, therefore we're missing information by making this assumption. So we can measure the AEDF from the desorption curve. So the bottom right here is the desorption curve. So we have a very high peak right at t equals 0, and then it falls off rapidly and then fades off over a long time to almost nothing. So from this desorption curve, it's possible to calculate the AEDF. I'm not smart enough to do that. So what I've done is written an app, which is the other way around. We create the AEDF in our app and see what the effect is on the absorption curve. And as a bonus, we get the isotherm and also the BET plot. So if you go to the next app, which is the AEDF app. So here we have that nice peak, but that's not real life. So let's add some high energy stuff. Just as Eric showed us with hexylamine and hexanol. So go to the H3, which is the height of a third peak. I'm just allowing you to choose 3 peaks. Go to the H3 peak and start raising it. Now we've got some high energy stuff. And from this, we see that there's a simulated increase in gamma D because this is going to tilt everything towards a higher gamma D, even though it's a relatively small amount of stuff there. And we can have some low energy stuff. We can move where these peaks are. It's free, we can do what we like. As a bonus, we don't just get a surface energy in the AEDF, we get an objective measure of the heterogeneity. This was Henri Ballard who came up with this particular thing, and I've implemented his technique for calculating heterogeneity. That's really important that we can get these numbers. But here's the problem. You will have noticed as you slide, for example, the H3, which is having a huge effect, that very little is happening in the desorption curve. It would be very nice if dramatic effects in high energy had dramatic effects on those initial parts of the curve, but they don't. They have an effect on the distant parts. So you need a very good machine and a very smart algorithm to keep it going overnight before you can get reliable values. So, as I said, at the moment I've just done this with boring alkanes. Who cares about alkanes? IGC is obsessed with alkanes, whereas none of us in real life can care much about them. So now we go to getting more formulation insights. If we've tried it with, say, octane, MEK, and IPA, then we might get these three different graphs, unlikely with these particular things, but you get the point. So we start to get insights into surface chemistry. Or, as Julien said, this might be three sample variants. We're seeing differences in surface sites, maybe from mechanical damage or processing history. It doesn't matter. By using three very different probes and getting the AEDF, the native AEDF, rather than an abstract surface energy, we're getting insights. And it's very hard to think of any other technique that does this. So although I'm often against bad IGC, I'm very much in favor of good IGC. So my last slide, making IGC relevant to formulators. We must admit that formulation reality is not this beautiful idealized IGC on these lovely particles with individual molecules. We have to admit that IGC will struggle to be fully relevant to many formulation issues. Use the fivefold way to dig out more information at infinite dilution. At the very least, it's great at seeing differences, but it may be suggestive of hypotheses, as Julien pointed out. But get into the habit of finite concentration work to start seeing what is needed, to find out more about the AEDF. This does need good machines. It does need a bit of bravery. It's really, to say we used alkanes because the experiments were easy to do is true, but not helpful. We as a community need to get into the habit of using more different probes. It's harder. Eric has told me how hard it is, but that's not an excuse. We have to solve these problems. And once we do that, we will get much more information about making IGC relevant to formulators. Now to your questions and, I hope, disagreements.
Steven, thank you very much for your excellent talk. Actually, I have not seen any open questions yet. So I guess people were actually using your apps, which is fantastic. And I found it especially very good how you described the absorption energy distribution function, because I think that really helps to get the value out of this.
I agree with you, but then we tend to agree on a lot, Ralph. So. Yeah. But I do often disagree with you as well, that's true.
Yeah, so that's fine too. So I hope there will be some more questions, but when I see on the time, maybe we can collect then the questions and we'll come later to this. Here is, there's one question about relating alkane showing dispersive HSP is dominating. So why is the dispersive part of the HSP values dominating? Is there any reason here?
Yes, the universe is mostly held together by dispersive forces. So the fact that octane doesn't evaporate is because every molecule on the planet has quite a distinct dispersive interaction. Far fewer molecules have big polar and hydrogen bonding interactions. So it's just that even the most boring molecule, fluorine or argon, they have dispersion parameters, even though they're boring. They are held together. So yes, they dominate.
So you say it's nothing wrong if the value is high, it is as it should be.
Correct, yes. Thank you. You put it much better than I do. Yes.
Excellent, great. Good. I would like to go now to the next speaker. Steven, thank you very much for your insights and your inspiration.